Meeting of the 25th of April. I'd like to welcome everybody. I'm glad to see so many people here. I'd like to welcome everybody for being able to be here and coming along, and to the press as well. I'm going to start off by introducing myself, then asking you to introduce yourselves as the speakers tonight. And this is to assist with the recording and transmission of the meeting. So my name is John Medland. I'm the councillor for Freshwater South, and I'm chairman of the planning committee. I'm going to pass to my left and ask each person to introduce themselves and their role.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening, committee. My name is Justin Thorne. I'm Strategic Manager of Legal Services.
Good afternoon. I'm Marie Bartlett. I'm a Democratic Services Manager.
Good afternoon, Councillor Debbie Andre, Ward Member for Sandown North and Cabinet Member for Children's Services, Education and Lifelong Skills.
Good afternoon, Councillor Paul Brading, representing Lake South.
Good afternoon, Councillor Jeff Brody, representing Pan Barton in Newport.
Good afternoon, Councillor Claire Critchson, representing Chale, Knighton and Torwell, and Chairman of the Isle of Wight Council.
Good afternoon, Councillor Chris Jarman, representing the wonderful ward of Totland and Cornwall.
Good afternoon, Councillor Martin Oliver, representing the glorious and scenic ward of Mountjoy and Shide in the glorious town of Newport.
Councillor Chris.
Sorry, I think we're going. Councillor Michael Lilly, representing Ryde, Apley and Elmfield, and here to speak in regard as a local member that this application is within.
Good afternoon, Ian Delaney, CEO of Captiva Homes and the applicants.
Good afternoon, I'm Simon Cook, Ryde Town Councillor, Chair of our Planning Committee, representing Ryde Town Council.
Hi, Mark Gaskin, Member of the Public and an objector.
Chairman, Matthew Price, Member for Fairley and Whippingham. Apologies for being late. I've just had a wisdom tooth out, so I apologise if I'm not quite my normal self tonight.
My sympathy.
Councillor Chris Quirk, Member for Shankly South.
Peter Spink, Councillor for Freshwater North and Yarmouth.
Nick Stewart, Councillor for Bryston, Kelbourne and Shampleigh.
Good afternoon, Councillor David Adams, Nettlestone and Sea.
I'm Emma Cox, Freshwater Parish Vice Chair, IWOC representative.
Neil Triton, Highways and Control Manager at Island Road.
Russell Chick, Planning Team Leader.
Sarah Wilkinson, Planning Team Leader.
Ollie Bolter, Strategic Manager for Planning and Infrastructure Delivery.
Thank you all very much indeed. There are no planned fire drills during this meeting, so if you hear the alarm, please treat it as if it's a real emergency and evacuate the building via the nearest safe escape route. The nearest safe escape route is via the signposted set of stairs to your left as you leave the council chamber or the public gallery. Exit via the door at the back of the building, walk across the inner car park around the building to the evacuation point, which is the pavement opposite the police station. The lifts cannot be used in the event of an emergency. Please do not re-enter the building until you are advised it is safe to do so by a council member of staff. I'd like to request that all mobile phones are switched off or put on silent. Also, I'd like to remind all members to use the microphone so that we can be clearly heard. I'd also like to request that no food is consumed during the meeting unless this is for a medical need. I also remind members of the committee that they cannot leave the council chamber during the presentation or debate on an application. If they do leave, they will be unable to vote on that application. Also remind both members and members of the public, both in the room and watching virtually, that they are present purely to observe the process and will not be permitted to speak unless they have a registered to speak in advance. Just going to run through the lighting system for speaking now. When you are asked to speak, the green light will display, as you can see. The amber light will display for a few seconds and then the red light will display. At this point, I will stop you talking. Happened last time, didn't it? Thank you. This is to ensure that all parties receive the same amount of time and that the process is seen to be fair. I'm going to move to the agenda. Item 1 is apologies and changes in membership. I'd like to ask our clerk to take us through those changes.
Chairman, we received apologies from Councillor Drew. Councillor Brading has been substituted. I have no other apologies.
Thank you. We now go on to the minutes of the previous 2 meetings, which were one meeting but held over 2 different dates. Do I have anyone who'd like to propose these meetings as a true record of the meeting? Councillor Quirk. Can anyone second the minutes? Councillor Jarman, thank you. I'd like to just take a vote on that. Can everyone vote who's in favour of the minutes being accepted as a true record? Thank you. I just have to stop for a second because I've got a lot of initialing to do. Bear with me.
Chair, if I can. Yeah, I tried to catch your eye before you went to the vote. I wasn't present for the second part of the meeting, so therefore I cannot vote on if you're taking them as a joint vote.
Stan, thank you. Yeah, so we're just clarifying that those who weren't obviously at the meeting cannot vote on the acceptance of the minutes.
Chairman, just for clarity for future meetings, you don't have to have been present at the meeting of the minutes that are before the committee for approval.
Thank you. I wasn't aware. Now, I'm going to go on to the next item, item 3, which is declarations of interest. And I immediately have to declare my own interest in this meeting. Following the application in 2021, I supported the formation of a campaign to judicially review that planning meeting, and I gave a £20 donation. As a result of that, the monitoring officer has very strongly advised me, very clearly advised me that I should not participate in this meeting in any form. Now, it's up to every individual member to accept or to reject the advice of the monitoring officer. Normally, had I not been the chairman, I would have considered I would have been okay to stay for this meeting. But as the chairman, I feel I feel obliged to follow his advice and leave this meeting. Now, as you're aware, we do not have a vice chairman present either. Before I carry on now, I'd like to ask if there's anyone else who has any declarations of interest to make. Councillor Jarman.
We do need to nominate a day chair in your continuance, as you've declined to sit today. So I was going to nominate Councillor Nick Stewart as day chair.
But come to that as the next item, please. But I'd just like to check with any other declarations of interest by individual members. Councillor Adams.
I also made a donation 2 years ago. Likewise, spoke to Chris Potter. He said it's my decision whether I sit or not, and I'm happy to sit.
Thank you. Councillor Spink.
I make the same 2 declarations that I made when this last came before Planning Committee. That is that I'm a member of the Campaign for the Protection of Rural England. I don't know how many other members there are, but I declare it, but I'm not predetermined by reason of that. The second thing is that I also made a financial contribution to the judicial review campaign. I consider that that may mean that I'm predisposed, but I'm not predetermined. In fact, the main reason that I supported the campaign was not that I took issue with the decision, but the procedural unfairness that I considered took place. So it hasn't affected my view of the case, or my view of the application, I should say, other than I didn't agree with the procedural matters of the committee.
You, Councillor Speak. Councillor Price.
Thank you, Chairman. Going back to that committee meeting when this was debated in 2021, I was not allowed to join the debate or vote because I hadn't been able to attend the whole site visit. Now, I understand that the obviously the issue with site visits, I think we've been over many, many times. I know this isn't a declaration of interest, but I thought it was the appropriate time to bring it up. So could I just ask for some advice with regards to that, because I didn't participate at the last debate that I was in for this item, and that I haven't had a site visit since. I said from the start that I felt that my knowledge of the site was pretty good, and my understanding of the application at the time was good enough for me to participate, but I wasn't able to participate and I wasn't allowed to vote. Could I just ask for some advice on that? I haven't actually decided whether I will vote tonight. It's going against all my principles, not voting one way or another for something. I rarely abstain ever in the 10 years that I've been a councillor, certainly not the planning committee, but I may decide that I may not actually vote for or against this item subject to how the debate goes. But could I have some advice on from legal as to whether it's considered that I am able to participate and vote?
Thank you, Councillor Price. I mean, yeah, we have discussed this. There have been changes. Is it possible for you to a little bit of help, Mr. Thorne?
Chairman, of course, and I'll do it briefly. And if Councillor Price wishes more substantive advice, I'm happy that we have a break and I provide that. But yeah, no, the answer is that I believe you can take part and vote. It is, of course, up to each individual member as to whether they have sufficient information or material information related to this application. I've noted Councillor Price has very good knowledge of the area, and one of the purposes of the site visit is to point out various aspects and how they might relate to the development. And if Councillor Price believes he has sufficient information, then it's a matter for him to make the judgment.
Thank you, Mr. Thorne. Councillor Quirk.
As with many, but not all members of the committee, I've voted on this twice before, voted the same way both times. So I am predisposed to vote the same way again, unless there is something that comes up. But I am not predetermined. If there's relevant information comes up, and I suspect that that should apply to all members who were at the previous, and so there should be a dispensation for all members who were at the previous meetings.
I'll ask Mr. Thorne.
Yeah, Chairman, rather than each member make the same point, the fact that members have voted on this matter previously within this chamber is not an interest to declare. Of course, today there is a new material consideration before the chamber, and that may or may not impact upon the way you vote.
Thank you. Councillor Jarman.
Yes, just to declare that I, like the others, also supported the earlier discussions about a judicial review of the original decision in 2021, and more importantly, that I was the one who initiated the motion a year ago to suggesting that this was recalled as a matter. That motion, of course, was rejected by the committee, I believe by 5-4, 6-4. Thank you, Jeff, for the correction. But I did make that declaration of my belief in the irregularities of the original meeting. So I just want to make that just as a formal declaration. I don't think it impedes my hearing this today.
Thank you. If there are no more declarations of interest, I'm going to go on to the next item, which Councillor Jarman started to preempt me on, which is the election of a new chairman for the item for this evening?
Chair, point of
Councillor
order. At the last meeting, when this issue came up, and in the minutes that we've just formally agreed, minute 27, at this point, both you and the vice chairman left the room before we came to the election of a chair for the meeting. So I would suggest, given the practice of the last meeting, that you should leave that now. And as happened at that meeting, an officer should conduct the election of an interim chair. Thank you.
Okay, that's your opinion. I was asked by the officers to take it in this particular order. It's partly because there is no vice chair, so there's no question of the fact we have to have a new chair. By staying in the chair for this point and public question time, it makes it easier for me to leave after public question time.
Of course, Chair, there was no vice chair last time either. The election of the interim chair was conducted by Mr. Ben Gard, as I recall. You are biased, you are predetermined on the application we're about to deal with, and for you to deal with this when you know how narrow the vote may well be this evening, be entirely inappropriate. I therefore ask that you leave, and I would also respectfully ask for the comments of the legal officer here, given that what happened at the last meeting, that you left and Councillor Drew both left beforehand. Should that not be the case now? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brodie. I do not feel predetermined on this particular application. I'll see if Mr. Thorne wants to make any comment on this.
Chairman, in my sudden call up to this committee, I was reviewing the papers and I did notice that you'd left previously before the election of the chair. So I considered the point, and I also asked the MO for his advice. And both our advice is that you do not need to help, even if you have the prejudicial interest in the later item on the agenda, from the matter of the nomination of the chair. And I'll put this to the committee. It is potentially possible that there is a tied vote, and then there needs to be a break of that vote, because the consequence, and some may entertain this more than others, the consequence is the committee could be left without a chairman if it were tied. And well, Councillor Andre, you may say this is worse or not. No, they could proceed absent a chairman.
Chair, I won't pursue it any further other than to say precisely the same thing happened at our last meeting. Nothing has changed. We could have had a tie at the last meeting as well. Clearly, there is an omission in the constitution of the council on this. I'm sure anybody observing will note the issue that I've raised. But it is interesting that somebody who has already declared a predetermination to the extent that they're going to leave is still going to chair the election of a replacement for them for a highly contentious application. Hopefully everybody will notice that. Thank you very much.
Councillor Brodie, you've made your point very clearly, and I feel we'll just continue as following the existing agenda. So I would like to ask for any nominations for a new temporary chairman. Councillor Brading, I beg your pardon.
Thank you, Chairman. I think this is a very complex issue faced with us this evening. I'd like to propose Councillor Quirk as the ex-chair of the Planning Committee should be the man to chair this committee this evening. He's got the experience of chairing the committee, and I think he's the man for the job this evening.
Do I have a second of Councillor Quirk? Are there any other nominations for the chairman? Councillor Jarman.
Yes, I'll reiterate what I mistakenly jumped in with earlier and renew my nomination for Councillor Nick Stewart. I think it's important to have a degree of a measured approach here and a good degree of neutrality, which I feel he brings.
Thank you. Is there a second of Andre? Andre, take it you're seconding Councillor Stewart. Councillor Stewart, you're happy?
I am indeed second.
Thank you. Are there any other nominations for chair? Right, we've got two choices then. I'm quite sure how we do this one. I guess I'll just ask ask for those who are in favour of Councillor Quirk being chairman today.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
I'd like to ask for those in favour of Councillor Nick Stewart as chairman, please.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Therefore, Councillor Stewart will be the chairman for item 4 on the agenda. I'm now going to just quickly go to public question time. Now, I have not received any public questions, but we have the option of verbal questions. But do remember that these are restricted to matters that are not on this current agenda. Are there any questions from the public gallery? No? Right. Okay, so I think now is the appropriate time for us to swap chairs. We've got something to leave the room. So thank you, and I'll rejoin you after this next item.
Good afternoon, committee. Thank you for your confidence. I think it's important that we recognise that there is a lot of experience and knowledge here. I've certainly been had the advantage of talking to many people, and it is quite impressive the depth of experience that the committee brings to this particular matter, and I look forward to hearing some of what's said. All of what's said. I apologise. Before we start, I have to be honest that I wasn't sure of what would happen tonight, this afternoon, and therefore I have not considered with other people how I might chair this meeting. In normal circumstances, if I was the chair of a committee, and I have done it a lot of times in different places, I would normally try and set out the parameters under which I would chair that meeting. Accordingly, I will now have to set out what may be a contentious approach. I consider that one of the issues that a committee like this face is that there are a lot of people who have extremely strong opinions, which is good. And I think that we need to hear those opinions. I also feel that it is important that we hear all of the elected members here. Accordingly, I would like to take each member after questions, obviously, and statements from other parties. I would like to take each person in turn and ask them to speak for a short period of time. Leave their judgment as to what short is. Mine may be shorter than others. And accordingly, that will give us a start for the debate. I think that the chances of us being here for some time is quite high, and I'd like to start with a reasonably level playing field. I'd also like to present something in consideration of what has happened before. You were kind enough to ask me to chair the previous meeting, and eventually that was deferred. However, my view, having considered even more of the paperwork, and there is an enormous bundle, that we should consider the key factor first. And in my view, having looked at most of what's happened before and considered some of the officers' recommendations previously, and of course they are the professionals and experts in many of these areas, that we consider strictly the curlew issue, inverted commas, first. If the curlew issue is decided, then we would move on to the additional points within this planning application. Now, because I have not pushed this or placed this before you before this meeting, I think it is only reasonable that I open the floor briefly after questions. After statements from other parties, to allow people to raise the point about dealing with this particular issue to start with. So in this instance, I think we should move on.
Chair, I respect the fact that you're a new councillor and haven't really got much experience of chairing council or council committee. I have got wide experience. I'll look to Mr. Thorne here as well, but I'm concerned that whilst I agree with some of what you're suggesting in terms of democracy, in terms of encouraging every member of the committee to participate in this important debate, I'm concerned that you're trying to limit one of the only issue really that we should be here for, in my view, to a large extent, the fair use issues, away from everything else, when we've been told repeatedly by the monitoring officer that we have to consider the application in its entirety. You're also suggesting that any votes effectively are going to be limited to what you allow. That is contrary to what is permitted within the Isle of Wight's constitution. As an elected member, I can propose anything at this committee. I may choose after very early on to propose refusal, approval, whichever, for whatever reason, given that a reason. And subject to satisfactory discussion on that, I would suggest respectfully that you need to deal with that through the democratic process. I don't think it's for you to be deferring a decision at an early stage, if that's what some of the members want here. So I would advise you to be very careful how you handle this, and to be well advised by Mr. Thorne, who's a vastly experienced legal officer of this council. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brodie. I take some of the points you raise. However, I have considered this matter very carefully. I do apologise, Councillor Spink. I have considered this matter very carefully, and I consider that the approach that I have suggested is the sensible approach in order to get to a conclusion to this particular planning application in an appropriate fashion. It is not to suggest, and I take your point, and this is where you are entirely correct, that I would wish to suppress, reduce the opinions and the proposals of elected members. I would not do that. I'll take Councillor Spink, and then I'll take some advice, and we can proceed from there.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, Councillor Brodie has raised the opinion of the monitoring officer. If one looks at page 135 of our bundle, which is the updated planning committee report for the matter hearing on the 21st of March, paragraph 3.2, well, actually paragraph 2.1, the three options are set out. Option one is to effectively, as I understand it, consider the mitigation. Option two is mitigation relating to the Curlew. Option two is to require alternative mitigation. Option three is to consider the application in its entirety. Now, at paragraph 3.4, there is a recommendation by the officers to this effect. It's the opinion of officers that no other material matters have changed to justify any other elements of the permission being reconsidered. Furthermore, officers are satisfied in the light of Natural England advice that revised enhancement and mitigation works are appropriate and acceptable. So options 2 or 3 are not recommended. So if we were to consider the matter in its entirety, we would be going against the officer's recommendation, and we would have to give clear reasons for that, it seems to me, in accordance with the normal rules.
I've not got that 3.4 appendix in my paperwork. Oh, sorry, I thought you said 3.4. It's always possible. Did you say 3.4? Did I say 3.4? Okay. It's paragraph 3.
Thank you.
Councillor Brodie, please.
Thank you, Chair. I just, there's this danger again that we're starting to get into deep waters again. At the last meeting, I think almost universally everybody came to deal with the issue of the curlews. Then, to our astonishment, we were told we had to deal with the entire application, listen to an entire presentation. And now I'm being told that we're going to have to deal with a specific issue again. I think it's all getting to be a bit of a mess, to be frank. Some of the advice that we've had has been contradictory from various parties. And Councillor Spink likes to refer to the fact, the procedural issues on the 27th of July 2021, which I absolutely and utterly refute, and officers of this council absolutely refute, inviting and I've made absolutely clear about that all the way along. But we are starting to get into very deep waters regarding procedure here. Not the sort of procedure that I would engage in any situation whatsoever. I think you're reinventing the Constitution. It has not gone through full council. You have to abide by the Constitution. You have to abide by the way in which, I think it's procedural rule 4, regarding meetings of this council are conducted. And I think it would be advisable to get advice from Mr. Thorne, because I'm starting to feel decidedly uncomfortable about the conduct of this meeting. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Brodie had a second bite of the cherry, if I may. It doesn't seem to me anything improper in this committee having due regard to the officer's recommendation. And it seems an extraordinary submission by Councillor Brodie that we are getting into deep water if we take the recommendation of officers. It's not the usual, well, it seems to me you are. It's not the usual course that Councillor Brodie takes.
If you give me a brief minute with Mr. Thorne, I will take his advice. I will take your submission, Mr. Jarman. Sorry, Councillor Jarman. Gosh, you can tell how bad I am at this already. Councillor Jarman.
Thank you, Chair. I arrived here today quite determined to speak as little as I could. I think it's important to refer to the advice we were given by the monitoring officer. I did put this to him as a question, and I did get a number of very favourable responses from other members of the committee looking forward to that answer. Unfortunately, the answer I got was not as clear as I would have hoped. But the detail that he did come back with was that there were no procedure irregularities arising from the original meeting, which this meeting needed to consider, effectively limiting the consideration to the curlew issue. I know this issue has gone backwards and forwards several times, but his advice on that point was very clear, that we were not here to address procedural irregularities on the whole matter, but simply on that of the matter which is before us relating to the delta of this issue, which is the curlews. So I'll stop at that point, because otherwise I think I might overcomplicate matters. But I do see several people agreeing with me.
I'd like to ask Mr. Thorne to make a statement now.
Yeah, not sure a statement, but perhaps some advice to try and assist members and I hope this doesn't sound semantical, but the committee acting as a local planning authority is rehearing the application. Planning Committee resolved to grant planning permission in July 21. This was subject to the 106 being negotiated and entered into based on heads of terms approved by the committee at that meeting. Permission itself was not issued. Committee also discussed this matter and resolved not to reconsider back in March 22. However, since that date, Natural England raised an objection that related to the impact of the development on the curlews. This was a new material consideration that had not been raised before, not before committee on previous occasions. As the new material consideration arose prior to the permission being issued, the LPA, through its officers, had to consider if it was material and if it might have made a difference to the original decision in July 21. Whilst officers are recommending that the mitigation measures outlined in the report can be appropriately mitigated, or the harm mitigated, therefore recommend the application be approved, it was considered it met that threshold for a referral back to the committee as the committee were the decision maker on this one issue alone. Given no permission has been issued, a significant period of time has elapsed, committee membership has changed, the application in its entirety, because it hasn't been issued, is before the committee. However, it is a matter for the members of the committee, each individual member of the committee, as to the debate on this item, including the breadth and length of such debate. Officers cannot limit the debate, but I can confirm officers are not suggesting that all members are required to debate all issues. It's just not for officers to stifle debate when the permission has not been issued. So in summary, Chair, it is the length of time and the change of membership that means that you have the full presentational material before you, and then it is open to members. Members may very well reflect back on the previous debate they've had and concentrate on the curlew issue. I hope that assists, Chair or Committee, but I'm happy to advise further.
Chair, would it be permissible for clarity at the appropriate time, therefore before I would suggest discussion of this matter, to take a vote on what, as you've just said, the members of the committee wish to consider, which we're entitled to do, because unless we decide the parameters, we'll not know what matters to raise. So surely we should have a vote. It's open to us to limit it to, it's open to us to limit it only to the, it's open to us to limit it only to the curlew, then we need to decide whether or not the majority of people on the committee want to do that.
Councillor Spink, Councillor Jarman and Councillor Brodie, I thank you. I'm very grateful. Now, I'm not asking you to speak at the moment, don't worry. Yeah. Thank you for your comments. It is something which I think is perfectly reasonable and perhaps is the way that I've taken this. So at this stage, what I suggest is that we take the public statements forward, the presentations, and then we have that discussion, which is what I wanted to do, to give you the opportunity to consider this particular major issue. That does not mean that other issues are off the table. It simply gives us an opportunity to consider that perhaps in advance of other things as perhaps one of the major issues. I was not at previous planning meetings. I will therefore have no opinion whatsoever on what happened in those meetings. And therefore, I think we can move forward as a committee and take the public statements. So we start with the officer presentation, as I've been reminded, and I apologise for not going straight to there.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening, members and the public. Excuse me. The application relates to an area of land as outlined in red on your screens, which is an area of 38.16 hectares. For locational purposes, Apley Road sits at the top point of the cursor. You've then got Marlborough Road running down this boundary. Council of Hope Road that runs along here. And then you have Bullen Road running along the south at this point, and Calthorpe Road running along this point. Along here. This is still Bullen Road running down here. Moving through, that's the same plan effectively, but in aerial image to show that site. For locational purposes, it might be helpful to identify. We were on the site on Friday, but this is the tree cast factory. These being the existing farm or the farm buildings, and this area in blue here being what we refer to on site as phase 1. I've included these two plans at the request of councillors, which incorporate the settlement boundary for the area of Ryde alongside both the red line boundary and the application boundary. In the one that's the red line boundary, the line is black for the settlement boundary. In the layout plan, the line for the settlement boundary is shown in red. I've incorporated a selection of photographs. Obviously, we were on site recently, but I thought it would be useful just to incorporate some photographs to show the existing properties in Hope Road, including the existing farmhouse, which is to be retained. Some images of the boundaries of the site. And then some larger panoramic views. Some photographs of the coach house. We did go and stand by the coach house where obviously work is being undertaken as part of the development and the demolition of various outbuildings to facilitate one of the accesses into the site. Moving through, some images of properties along Bullen Road. And then another couple of panoramics and the garage that's currently associated with 125 Marlborough Road. We did also stand there and observe where the multi-user route would be breaking through from the site onto Marlborough Road. I've got more details on that later. And so the application seeks consent for 473 dwellings, 35% of which would be affordable housing. The scheme also includes for a doctor's surgery and office building at the point of the cursor, as well as a cafe in this location, which is on the edge of what you'll see the report is referred to as a SANG, which is a area of open space, suitable alternative natural green space, effectively, which is this large area here, which provides that approximately just under 10 hectares of SANG. There are a number of multi-user routes that would run through the site, not only through the SANG to provide dog walking routes, but also councillors will note that there was an unusual shaped red line for this site, and that's a multi-user route that would run around this field. Another one that would run along here to connect down to Tesco's, as well as the link to Marlborough Road, which we discussed previously. The application would also incorporate various off-site highway improvements that are set out in the report, as well as the demolition of various buildings, which we've just shown in the photographs, associated with both Westridge Farm itself and the dairy off Bullen Road, which is the area referred to as the coach house, the former dairy down there also, as well as the multi-user route on Marlborough Road, apologies. The application also includes 3 access points, one from Bullen Road, at the point of the cursor, one from the extended route of Hope Road, or Lime Tree Close as it's now referred to at that point, and then one off Apley Road where we also stood as part of the development. I've incorporated this plan that simply just shows the layout but not in colour form effectively, but it is the same image. I thought this image would be useful for councillors in terms of the wider settlement. This shows the urban grain of the area, showing the density of the development in relation to the surrounding settlement, as well as its relationship in terms of the progression of development in the area. Officers have outlined in the report, they consider that the proposed development does not come further south than the existing form of development, east than the existing buildings, or further north or west than the existing settlement forms. In terms of trying to locate it on that plan, again, I draw members to the Truecast factory, which is probably the easiest point of reference. So the application boundary, the application development actually runs through here. Officers consider this plan helps to show how the density of the development is compatible with the density of the surrounding area. The report references various phases through the development. This is the submitted phasing plan. It's only indicative at this point, and councillors will note that there is a condition as part of the application which requires a phasing plan to be submitted for the dwellings, for the SANG and for the highway works, in order to ensure that it appropriately flows through from in that respect. But it also allows, rather than working through the layout ABC, as one would expect, it would allow development to occur at A as well as G if it was wished to come from both ends, effectively, for want of a better term. What I will now do is work through some slides showing each phase in turn, and some images in relation to both the layout in more detail of that phase and some elevational treatments. This is phase A, which is the top area shown in a pink colour. Within this phase, the proposal seeks to provide 50 units as well as the doctor's surgery in this area. The area both above and below the doctor's surgery would provide an area of public open space. Councils will note the parking areas have a hatching over them in this location and this location. I will show you images of that in more detail further in the report, but effectively they are carports or pagodas, as referred to in the report, which provides solar panels on the roof that would allow for electric charging for cars that are parking in those spaces. I've incorporated some street scenes through this phase of the development. The lower two would show the spine road running all the way through. You'll note where the line is where you move from. So these dwellings are the same as those dwellings, if that makes sense. And the top one showing the visual appearance of the site from Apley Road. I haven't included street scenes and elevational treatments for every phase. Councillors, we did go and look at phase 1 while we were on site, and we discussed the design concept of the units being extremely similar to those units. I have, however, incorporated some CGIs in order to help with that, but certainly the materials and the landscaping would be very similar to that seen within phase 1. The plan on screen now shows the visual and the elevations and the floor plans of the proposed doctor's surgery. The location is shown in green at this point, as shown on the previous plan also. This surgery would include offices on the first floor and consulting rooms on the ground floor. As identified on site and in the report, the surgery incorporates a kind of tower turret feature to pick up on features seen in Apley Manor. And the plans indicate, so Apley Manor being in this image here. Again, a roof plan and the remaining elevations of that proposed building. Moving through to phase B, this would seek consent for 73 units and the retention of the existing farmhouse. To locate, councillors, because I was stood in front of it on site, this is the existing farmhouse, and then the remainder of the phase shown in bolder type. Again, moving through, seeing some street scenes for that phase and the nature of units being proposed. Moving through to phase C, this proposes 57 units, as well as the cafe that would be associated with the area of SANG. And councillors will again note the carports or pagodas with the solar panels on top for those who wish to utilise both the SANG and the cafe. Phase D, which seeks consent for 40, oh no, apologies, not phase D yet, that is the street scenes for phase C, which show, so sorry, you have to go from the bottom one to the top one, apologies for the order they appear. So this property shown here is the same as that property shown at that point. So it just didn't fit on the screen. So you run through, and then the cafe building is sat the other side of those trees, which shows this view through here that can be seen by that blue line. And then some elevations and floor plans of the proposed cafe building. We move to phase D, which would propose 44 units councillors will note that each unit does have parking, allocated parking for each of the units, as well as in this image, certainly a small area of, or a relatively large area of private amenity space as part of that layout. Moving through to phase E, which will provide 30 units. Phase F, which would provide 77 units. Councillors may note that there was a slight reduction in the number of units who originally applied for, and this is referred to in the report. In essence, 2 units were removed from this part of the site where the cursor is, because of concerns with regard to the proximity of shade from these trees along here. So those units have been removed in order that the built line was set back at that point. This phase would also include the link. This is the point in which the link from Marlborough Road joins the site, and it would run alongside a proposed extension to the allotments. The allotment extension is approximately 1,425 square metres, which would create between 4 and 8 allotments, depending on what size criteria you use for an allotment. And again, some street scenes for that phase. This plan, I thought it useful to show the entrance for the multi-user route coming from Marlborough Road once the garage has been removed. So the existing garage, which we saw on site, would effectively be replaced with a replacement garage here. So the property would still have that. And then the access would come through here. That would solely be for pedestrians and cyclists, and multi-user. It would not be for vehicles, but it would be 3 metres wide to provide that. There would be a central bollard effectively to stop cars being able to drive down it. I thought this would be a useful image to show not only the purpose of that link, but how it then links to sustainable transport modes in and around the site, and how the site links to those itself. So this is where we would see the link come through, and as we saw on site, there are the red dots effectively are bus stops. So the red dots provide the bus stops, and then you also have red dots and bus stops on Apley Road. The bus stops would also be relocated and reconfigured with shelters on that, which I will get to in a moment in terms of the visuals. So this shows the bus routes as well as the location of bus stops, and how the site through the link to Marlborough Road and the link to Ashley Road would connect to those bus stops. Moving on to phase G, which would provide 66 units. Councillors will also see a green area running along the boundary here. That also follows through into phase F, which we will see shortly. That's a 5 metre ecological buffer, but it also provides a buffer between the properties and the neighbouring properties that front Bullen Road. The access point onto Bullen Road and the works for the coach house are also proposed within this phase, or is shown within this phase, and are here. The access road to the site coming directly through, seeing the demolition of the building we saw on site, in order to provide access through here. Some images of that phase, as councillors will note in the report, and also shown in this street scene. The properties along the boundary with the existing properties in Bullen Road are shown to be bungalows to reduce the impact on the amenity of those existing residents. I've incorporated some additional elevations of the coach house, as work is proposed to this, which effectively would convert it from 1 property into 2, and then the proposed floor plans as a result of those changes. Council will note in the photograph that it shows that there is currently a swimming pool in the grounds of that property. That would effectively be filled in, provide an amenity area for 1/2 of that property, and then the amenity area for the second property would be then alongside that. Councillors will see the access to the site running along this point, and then the access to the coach houses, as they would be along the existing access that we walked round. And then some elevations that shows that break through the building to provide the access. Moving through to phase H, this would provide 37 units, as well as that 5 metre ecological buffer we previously discussed. And again, the properties on the boundary are shown to be bungalows. and just a street scene to confirm that. Phase J, councils will note there is no phase I. That's on purpose. Generally, we wouldn't do I's and Q's or O's, they're too close. Phase J would incorporate 39 units, and again, a similar design concept to the other phases. Moving on to the SANG, which provides an area of approximately 10 hectares between the edge of the development and Calthorpe Road, which is shown here. And the purpose of this area is to provide an alternative recreation space and walking area to, in essence, the beach. And therefore, it is encouraged that this would be used by dog walkers. As a result, there is areas specifically within the site, this being a local area of equipped play for children close to the car parking and the cafe area, and then a specific dog training area, which was requested by Natural England in this part of the site here, which in essence would help to encourage people to bring dogs to the site, certainly in the months where they're going to the beach. Councillors will note a circular walk as part of this to encourage this for recreational purposes, as well as various features to make it visually enhanced. These show some representations of the SANG area, where councillors, you noted the circles on the plan. It's this element and this kind of feature that is proposed within that space to make it a more interactive environment. I now have a couple of slides just to show the proposed bin store and bike stores, flats that are included on site, and the garages at the points in which they are proposed. And an image showing the carports referred to earlier, which would serve the car parking areas for both the cafe and the doctor's surgery, which was, as shown, would incorporate solar panels to allow for electric car charging. As stated, the proposal would create an access onto Apley Road, as well as improvement works, including onward connectivity to the cycle routes from the site, a proposed zebra crossing, and enhancements to the bus stops, both here and here on both sides of the road. On site, a wall was discussed because the plan shows that a wall would be removed at this point. There is a very lovely wall running through the site boundary, which will be retained as part of the development. And so I just wanted to confirm that where this plan discusses an existing wall to be retained, it's this element here that juts forward. And so this part would be removed, but not the long wall running through the site. That would be retained. This plan showing the proposed access onto Bullen Road, which again would have a link to the footpath discussed to go through to Tesco's at this point, as well as this footpath running along the side of the road to link to the existing drop crossing and an improved drop crossing in Cothey Way, and a small area of footway on this side of the road of the development in order to allow a safe crossing point, which would be provided a pinch point in the road as a vehicle priority point. As councillors will note, coming into the site, there would be speed restrictions in order to ensure safe passage, as well as a 3-metre wide footway cycleway running alongside that, what I refer to as a spine road. The application would also include, as we've discussed, a link into Marlborough Road at this point. And as part of that, there would also be a zebra crossing incorporated to ensure that when coming from the development onto Marlborough Road, there is a safe crossing point if required. I've incorporated this plan to assist in terms of some of the landscape discussions, and this was shown in relation to the application site is referred to within the pasture land 2 landscape character. And I thought this would be useful to show that PL2 is pasture land 2, so we're looking at these areas on the screen, and therefore the application results in what we consider to be a relatively small section of what is that landscape character area. And now I have a number of images and a number of slides, which I will run through relatively quickly, as I did last time. Councillors, you would have seen this presentation, which shows the viewpoints into the site from various points in the immediate vicinity. So the dots effectively effectively show the points in which the images were taken, and I will run through those in turn. What this plan shows, if councillors haven't seen a plan of this nature before, is that this is a plan showing the zones of visual influence. So the areas of purple, effectively, are where you may be able to see the development from. When taking into account topography and buildings, it considers an area up to 3 kilometres. As you get further from that, the human eye can't detect it. It becomes much harder to see, effectively. So you will see we've got some outer line points. So there is a point over here and a point over there, but they are some distance from the site. So when viewed across, you are seeing it from an officer's position perspective in the context of the existing settlement. There are also 2 views on the western boundary at this point. So moving through, you have viewpoint 1, which is located here off Apley Road. Councillors, we did stand in this position. View 2, which is at this point. View 3, which is here. View 4, which is down here. View 5, up at this point here, viewing across. View 6, which is here. Calthorpe Road, that helps. View 7, which is over in this position. View 8, down at the pedestrian link route. View 9, which is further over here, so the site is seen in the distance. This effectively being the ridge of Bullen Road, if that helps at all. The site is in this area here, or would be, the site is, would be, apologies. Viewpoint 10, which is down here, apologies. So for identification purposes, Tesco's is here. The approximate location of the site is in this space here, and this being the ridge of Bullen Road and Pondwell. So you are some distance from the site at this point. Viewpoint 11, again, you are further at this point, this being the location of the site in here. View 12, which is from the west. And view 13, slightly further up. Again, you'll note these longer images will show the extent of the site panoramics in that configuration. And then view 14 shows the site from Ryde Pier, where it would not be discernible within the context of the existing settlement as far as officers are concerned. Moving on to the matter of the curlew habitat, which is the situation of change in relation to the previous time the application was considered by this committee. The site identified as IW46 is referred to in the report, which is the existing area identified as being habitat for curlews. It's an area of 11.27 hectares and it's identified within the Solent Waders and Brentby strategy. I've tried to pull some images together to help councillors visualise both the area of mitigation land, the area of existing curlew habitat and the development site. What councillors will see from this site, if they use for locational purposes, obviously this area of the site relates to this element of the site, and then we run through. This area in blue is the proposed habitat mitigation land, which in essence is just off the screen. It's around about here on the application site. So what councillors may note is that, and as referred to in the further reports, that approximately 77% of the identified site is actually covered by the SAN, with 23% being incorporating built form from the development. The mitigation land itself, I'm not sure which image councillors find more helpful, but the mitigation land itself is an area of 6.4 hectares. is located on the corner of Calthorpe Road and Bullen Road. On site, we discussed the distance between the proposed residential properties and the mitigation land. As the crow flies, it's approximately 130 metres. But as councillors will see, between you have this area of woodland that runs kind of an L shape, which is quite a useful way to locate. And again, that L-shaped area of woodland that sits between the two. And the area in blue being the mitigation land, the area in red being the development area. And then obviously this showing it in relation to the built form of the proposed development. As discussed in detail in the report, the proposed mitigation incorporates various works to enhance this site, including various scrapes and plateaus that would be designed to be wet in order to provide a kind of wetland habitat, as well as other works to allow the roadside boundary to naturally grow in order to provide a screen and a protective area for that habitat. If I go through a very brief list, which might be helpful in terms of what's covered as part of the mitigation strategy. So the mitigation enhancement plan includes 4 education boards, which we discussed on site, that would be provided at the locked gates either end. So there'd be a locked gate at the bridge down here and a locked gate at the entrance where we stood, which would effectively indicate to people why the site isn't publicly accessible and encourage them to stay off the land, and provide information about curlews. The application, as shown by these features running through the centre, would provide scrapes and plateaus. They would be linked, as shown by the blue line, by an irrigation network to provide for a wet habitat for the curlews. The roadside boundaries, as shown in green, would be allowed to grow to approximately 2.5 metres in height and thickened to provide greater habitat protection. And the existing boundaries would be allowed to regenerate and will be supplemented with planting as and where it's necessary. I've incorporated some images of the Sang land. This image, as you can see from the red arrow, was taken from stood just by the farm buildings looking across. So the point of the cursor shows where that mitigation land is. Here, what I have attempted to do, but apologies, it's very blurry, is zoom into that image to show the difference as you see in the buildings on the ridge, providing an indication of the boundary with Bullen Road. As we move through, some other images as shown at the point of the red lines, which effectively are 3 images taken stood at the entrance to the site by the gate. So one running down the boundary, one more through the site, and then one running along the Bullen Road boundary, which show that area. And then some images taken further down, looking into the top field and then into the bottom field as part of that curlew mitigation habitat. And then some further images, the top one looking effectively part way down Bullen Road across over the hedge, and then an image taken further down into the lower field. I also thought it would be useful to show an image from this direction. So this is the site when going to the fullest extent of it in Bullen Road, and then looking back across to the entrance, which is over here by the existing pinch point in Bullen Road. This being the habitat land itself. And that's it. Thank you, Chairman.
I'd like to thank the Chief Planning Officer for making that presentation. There's an awful lot of effort being put into that and an awful lot of photographs as well. So I hope you all looked at those very carefully. At this stage, we would like to move on to speakers. I have a running order. So in this particular case, I'd like to ask Mike, sorry, I need improved glasses, don't I? I'd like to ask Mark Gaskin to speak for 3 minutes and 6 minutes. Can we have 3 minutes? That was a joke, I apologise. Yes, please.
Councillors, community websites and social media have on the whole been quiet on this application over the last year to allow legal advice to unfold. But the public are no less incensed than they were in 2016 at this potential loss of an island agricultural and environmental asset. In fact, the more they've become aware of, the stronger their anger and resolve has become. We urge you to reject this application in its entirety. Councillors, I respect the difficulty of your role, but I wish to remind you that the farming family vacated the land not because they did not want to continue stewardship of the land or for their next generation to do so, but because events prior to and during the 2021's meeting left them with no other viable choice. Sarah Wilkinson recently stated that planning runs with the land and that it's for the land's use. Some of this land intended use in this application has now changed since its original submission. Councillors, residents speaking here for 6 minutes is no substitute for another full public consultation. The land in this application has been farmland since pre-Doomsday Book, over 30 generations, and it has been used for the provision of food, wood, orchards, and many other things, and more recently, a dairy. Throughout, it has been a home for important wildlife and ecology. The site is rightly within the buffer zone of the Solent and Southampton Water SPA. When a species is red listed, this is what it means. They are threatened with extinction. Councillors, a quote, "Everyone should be concerned that the UK bird populations are continuing to decline, as this is a crucial indicator of the condition of our environment and health of our natural world." Dr. Richard Gregory, RSPB's Head of Science. DEFRA have also recently made a similar statement. Nationally, between 2015 and 2020, 48% of bird species declined. Another quote from RSPB's Head of Science. "We are in a nature and climate emergency, and we need urgent action to keep common species common and to save those already on the brink of being lost. This is not something on the distant horizon, but on our doorsteps." Councillors, curlew are a priority endangered species for the RSPB. Curlew, 10 to 20 numbers is not insignificant. At the local RSPB Brading Marshes Reserve, their best count this winter was 17. They are one of our fastest declining species. The acknowledged experts with regards to UK birds are the RSPB and the British Trust for Ornithology. Why haven't either of these bodies been formally consulted about this and other red listed species present on this site? Proposed alternative site for curlew is unsuitable. When tied in, they need to continue feeding on soils that are naturally wet and which stay wet so they can forage for food, worms and invertebrates. They are witnessed presently to use parts of the farmland with such qualities and, importantly, which are the remotest from disturbance by humans and dogs. Other red listed species regularly seen on the farmland that the public have informed this council of are linnets, red listed, starlings, red listed, greenfinch, red listed, dormouse, red listed. In fact, dormouse are already extinct in 17 counties in England, and have declined in Britain by over 50% since the year 2000. The ecology reports provided by the applicant have described DEFRA recorded ancient woodland, Cothy Bottom, as low grade with brambles. This age varied ancient woodland with bramble understory is the most favoured habitat of the dormouse, and the applicant wants to cut a 6 metre wide multi-use path, a road in other words, through it and create permanent disturbance of the ancient woodland and its wildlife. The ecology report states, this would result in a minor beneficial effect. Councillors, do you recall the Woodland Trust recently informing you of the need for 50 metre buffer zones? Councillors, the ecology reports provided by the applicant are often notable for their woeful absence of important, relevant information and for their frequent willingness to dismiss many significant impacts as negligible or no change. Also, officers of the council, whether planning, ecological, arboreal or archaeological, have all too often discharged requirements or conditions relating to the farmland or neighbouring facilitating applications by stating a justification, and I quote, given the information provided, end of quote, and have not sufficiently questioned the robustness of the information before them. Facts matter, as does taking appropriate and required action. Councillors, you were each elected by residents of this island to act on their behalf in being responsible custodians of its assets. Please reject this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gaskin. I'd now like to invite Simon Cook from Ryde Town Council to speak.
Thank you, Chair. Members of the committee, the consultation period for this application happened during a COVID lockdown. Despite that, Ryde Town Council went to great lengths to consult with local residents by distributing leaflets to around 2,000 homes in the local area. 92% of respondents objected. We submitted a report to you summarising this consultation, along with objection comments made at the time by RTC Planning Committee. If you look at the bottom of page 43 of your report, you will see an apparent summary of our comments. As you will see, the consultation we undertook is mentioned. Underneath that is an additional comment that we made after our main objection. But please note, there is no mention of the substantive objections made by Ryde Council. No summary, nothing. The main views of RTC are entirely missing from this report. A member would have to trawl through the hundreds of comments on the planning web portal, as our response is buried amongst one submitted by the public under the name of Mr. Ryde Town Council Chambers. So it's extremely unlikely you know what our objections actually are. It is entirely unacceptable that the Town Council and by extension the local community have had their views curtailed in this way. We are a statutory consultee and we would expect our objections to be made available to this committee. This is yet another error in a deeply flawed process. I wish to register our protest over this submission in the strongest possible terms. I clearly do not have time to go through the 9 separate grounds that made up our objection, but I will highlight a few as best as I can. The first two were as follows. Proposed development is outside of the designated settlement boundary as per the Island Land Court strategy, and although in places it is adjacent to the boundary, insufficient attempt has been made to justify building on an area which is only in part immediately outside the boundary, which is contrary to policy SP1. We also argued the proposed development may in the future facilitate settlement coalescence with Nettleston and Seaview, as the application arose to historic and natural environment and countryside between the parishes of Ryde Town and Nettleston and Seaview, contrary to policy AAP2. You would think that such fundamental points that threaten the very boundaries of a town would be of sufficient reason to refuse an application, but no doubt such concerns will once again be batted away under the mantra of the presumption in favour of sustainable development. We also expressed extreme concern of the loss of the last farm in Ryde, which your officers have previously argued is of little weight as a material consideration. Even less now, I suppose, given that the farmer and his family have since been hounded from their home and livelihood. This seems particularly crass given we live in an age of acute climate and environmental concerns and our island is a UNESCO biosphere. We also made comment about the location of the proposed GP surgery, arguing that it is in an inappropriate position. We also stated that we believe it creates over-provision of health facilities that cannot be met. I note that it appears that it's being argued that this would be an entirely new surgery that will create extra capacity. However, it's been brought to my attention that investigations by local residents indicate this will be nothing of the sort. It will merely facilitate the rehousing of an existing surgery in the town. I urge councillors here to ask the appropriate questions to get the truth of the matter rather than just accept this at face value. I would also like to remind members that the much referred to presumption in favour of sustainable development in the NPPF is merely guidance, not law. Similarly, your officers offer advice which is entirely up to you to take or not. You are the decision makers, and please do not blindly accept you have no choice in determining this application. There have been well over 4,000 signatories of support for refusal and many hundreds of objections made on your portal, both from residents and community organisations. You should give great weight to this significant public interest. You are, of course, here as community representatives. My final point is another regarding the consultation process. Not only are objections missing in your report, but to add insult to injury, Rye Town Council has not been consulted at all on the proposed mitigation plan. That the elected representatives of Ryde and the residents themselves have been denied their statutory right is unacceptable. For all these reasons, and the ones that you have not been able to read or hear, we maintain our objections to this application and urge councillors to adhere to refuse the application. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cook. I'd now like to give Mr. Delaney a chance to finish his drink and then speak.
Good afternoon, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to address you directly today. I will use the time made available to me to address three important aspects of this development: sustainability, affordability, and delivering for the local community. Firstly, sustainability. At Captiva, we recognise that development on greenfield comes at a cost, but we must also recognise that some greenfield development is required if we're to provide the housing islanders need. So surely the question becomes, if we must build on some greenfield sites, which ones are most sustainable and how do we do so responsibly? It is an emotive topic and one Captiva Homes has faced into. It must start with building on sites allocated as sustainable by this local authority, as this site has been in the emerging dips. We must then look at how sustainably we can build, how green we can make the homes we create, and how we can mitigate the impact we have. Every home at Westacre Park will be SAP A rated and will include air source heat pumps, PV or solar panels, alongside our fabric first approach to construction, which means we'll be delivering zero carbon ready homes. This commitment reduces carbon emissions, but also significantly lowers running costs for residents. The parking area at the doctor's surgery includes solar panels that support renewable EV charging. We are committed to delivering biodiversity net gain. This development achieves 17%, well above the future 10% target. This is achieved in part through the planting of over 2,000 trees and 1,700 metres of hedgerow. Captiva is on track to be a net zero business well ahead of the Council's 2030 target. We can say with confidence this development is setting new standards on the island in terms of its approach to sustainability. Point 2, affordability. This is one of the most challenging subjects we deal with. Over the last 10 years, only 10% of the new build housing delivered on the island has been affordable, an average of less than 40 homes a year. This failure is a huge contributor to the current island housing crisis. The recent Planning Services peer review called for larger housing schemes that deliver 35% affordable homes to address this, and Westacre Park does just that. In phase 1, we delivered 30 affordable homes with rents from £101 per week, and 2-bed shared ownership homes from £105,000. In phase 2, we will see 166 desperately needed affordable homes delivered, 71% of which, or 118 units, of which will be for rent. Many council members and officers have looked around the affordable homes we've recently delivered at Westacre and Rupley. Their feedback has been overwhelmingly positive. This should give you great confidence in the design, the quality, and the affordability of the proposal that sits before you today. Point 3, delivering for the local community. Too often, new build development offers little integration or added value to the communities to which it is attached. We listen to local concerns and aim to deliver benefits that extend beyond the residents of the development. We've worked with a group of local doctors who are committed to delivering a state-of-the-art, increased capacity medical facility for Ryde. NHS funding is approved, and we stand ready to work with them to deliver the surgery in the first phase of development. We know islanders want and need these homes. 80% of homes in phase 1 went to existing islanders, 50% to existing Ryde residents, and we have 747 active inquiries on the wait list for this development. Captiva has delivered on every one of our planning applications, and we will start work on site within weeks of consent being issued. We've listened to Ryde Town Council's concerns over the town's dire shortage of public open spaces, and we're delivering a 10-hectare country park. We've listened to concerns over sustainable travel, and we've liaised with Cyclewhite to deliver significant improvements to Ryde's cycle and pedestrian network, including provision of one of the LC Whip's strategic routes, linking Bullen Road and Apley Road. Finally, we've worked closely with Natural England and the Council's Ecology Officer to deliver a 6-hectare enhanced curlew habitat that their ornithology experts have deemed acceptable. Hopefully, I've delivered and highlighted some of the key benefits of this development for you. Officers have reported on the compliance of this development. But before I finish, I want to touch on the wider housing picture. This council talks about the island housing crisis being its #1 strategic priority. It acknowledges 2,500 households on a wait list. But for well over a decade, there's been a collective failure to deliver the homes needed. This site is not the silver bullet, but it is forecast to provide the single largest delivery of homes on the island in the next 5 years. I'm sure we can all agree inappropriate, unsustainable, undeliverable development proposals should be stopped. This application is none of those things. If we, and by we I mean all stakeholders involved in housing delivery on the island, if we do nothing, if we build nothing, if we continue the failed trajectory of the last decade's under delivery, what happens? Prices and rents continue to rise above earnings. Home ownership is pushed further out of reach. Rental stocks continue to shrink. The affordable rented housing need keeps growing, from breaking point today to broken point tomorrow.
Thank you very much for that. And I appreciate quite a well-structured argument. It's helpful to councillors to actually understand exactly what's being said from developers and from, as we've had previously, objectors. I have a request from the ward member to speak, Councillor Michael Lilly, and I'd like to call on him to present to us this stage.
Thank you, Chair. I was elected to stand up for upholding the rights and advocating the voices of the residents of Ryde, Apley and Elmfield Ward and Ryde. I want to make sure their voices are clearly heard tonight. There have been 4,286 signatories of the support for refusal, 570 objections on the planning portal. There are over 400 contributors on the Westbridge Farm crowdfunding site calling for judicial review of this application. A serious material consideration should be attributed to this public interest. The majority of objections quote correct policy references, support a refusal compared to a mere 4 letters of support. This application is not about housing against environment and green fields. Ryde needs both. We need social rented housing, but we also have a deficit in green space. WAP is located alongside the 3 of the poorest wards of the Isle of Wight, where families have little access to nature and outside environment compared to those privileged to live in an A and B area. This application is, however, now not about these things, but about whether proper process has been followed. It is about evidence, facts, and law. On the 27th of July 2021 meeting, there was a significant error, a significant mistake, and missing facts that would have meant the weighting of evidence would have been to refusal, not approval. I quote from an email to IWC LPA dated the 24th of June 2022 from Natural England on the planning portal highlights it was the applicant not submitting assessments relating to the curlew. It says the Isle of Wight Council's appropriate assessment, which also does not include reference to this supporting habitat. The site supports a number of curlew. I would suggest it is unlikely that the use of the site as SANG would be sympathetic to the ongoing suitability of the site for the qualifying features of the SPA. This is a very serious exclusion, as the WAP site is in fact a habitat protected site. NPF paragraphs 182 and 180 states the presumption in favour of sustainable development does not apply to the destruction of a habitat protected site. There is a real risk that the curlew will be lost as breeding spirits in lowland southern England. This means that every curlew counts and any survey and assessment has to be detailed and thorough. The curlew do change the whole weighting as presented on the 27th of July. The presumption in favour of sustainable development is the single justification which the applicant and Isle of Wight officers are relying on. Planning officers are maintaining that the original vote to grant permission would be a material consideration, but this cannot be the case as the correct habitat assessment is not produced at the meeting. As required by the correct habitat assessment required by the Habitats and Wild Birds Directive, paragraph 5.5 of the core plan and paragraph 182 of the NPPF. These regulations are set down by Parliament and cannot be overridden by this council or NPPF. There is clear evidence these directives have not been met, especially Regulation 6.3. Therefore, the application would have been needed to have been lawfully refused outright on the 20 to 21st meeting. The law in relation to the compilation of habitat assessment is very clear. You have a duty as the LPA committee that the strict legal tests set out in the Habitats Directive must be adhered to in order for you to have an informed vote. The evidence is simply there. There was no consultation with town and parish councils, no consultation with community residents. The mitigation plan reduces the site significantly to an alternative site that has no proper assessment. No consideration of cumulative effects of 5 very close full or outline planning permissions which are on the greenfield sites. The only count of curlews was in 2018-19, which was short-term and now out of date. The Game and Conservation Trust clearly state the data is not robust, 15 curlews is not insignificant, the proposed new habitat landscape is not attractive, and the presence of other developments opposed to developments may in fact deter the curlews. The mitigation land being offered in the new proposals covers 6.4 hectares, and so there is on paper 4.87 hectares net loss. It is not acceptable to almost have half the allocation given to the 1046. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lilly, for putting the case very clearly for what you would say for your ward and your residents. I'd now like to invite the officers to make a few additional comments before we move on to the items that we discussed previously.
Thank you, Chairman. I think I just wanted to clarify some points following that last some of the last comments that have just been made. Yes, absolutely correct. Natural England did write to officers following the previous committee meeting before we issued the decision to advise that the curlew habitat, we weren't aware that Natural England weren't aware of the designated land at that point, and therefore made us aware of it. At that point, we stopped all processing of issuing the decision and started discussing the issues at hand. Yes, the point was correct that the appropriate assessment that was undertaken at the time did not incorporate the curlews because we were not aware of that being an issue. At the point in which we were aware, we worked to produce mitigation and to redo the habitat, the appropriate assessment. As you'll see from your report package, the appropriate assessment has been redone. Natural England have signed it off and are absolutely satisfied with the mitigation measures being put forward. The Solent Waders Brent Geese strategy does clearly state that the replacement habitat it's not about like for like in area effectively. It's about the offer that's put forward. We had many discussions with Natural England in terms of the suitability of the habitat and what was necessary to make it better quality and improve it. That is where the enhancement plan has been produced from. As stated by one of by speakers, we did have significant consultation with Natural England, who themselves had significant consultation with their expert ornithologist, who sits on the Waders and Brent Geese Strategy Board. And that is how we got to a position where the mitigation land was considered to be appropriate and the appropriate assessment could be undertaken, and Natural England have signed that off. In relation to comments about the counts and the data, I think I've quoted down the data is not robust and it was undertaken in 1819. The data that we have on the curlew use of the site was provided by the Waders Brent Geese Strategy Board. That is produced, that is the evidence that is telling us that the scheme needs to do the mitigation. As outlined in the report, and in the strategy itself, there are limitations to that work. They admit there are limitations to that work. However, that is the evidence that they are utilising to say we must mitigate it. It could be argued that that work is inappropriate and therefore there should be no mitigation because the data is not sufficiently robust to demonstrate that either positive or negative. It is the evidence that we have in front of us, the evidence that Natural England have used to provide their comment, and they have advised the local authority. They have not objected, they have not instructed. They've advised the local authority to rerun the habitats regulations assessment. We worked we requested that Natural England then work with the developer to produce appropriate mitigation, which would then allow us to rerun that habitat mitigations assessment, which is what we've done. And Natural England have signed off that based on the information that we have put on the website that councillors have all seen and it's included in the pack that deals with the enhancement mitigation strategy and the plan that you have within the report. That's all that I was saying.
Thank you for making that clear statement there. I'd now like to move on to where we started, which is a consideration that we should take the curlews, in inverted commas, obviously there's a lot more behind that, issue as a first point. That does not stop us from considering all of the other aspects of the development once we have dealt with that. That does not stop any councillor at any stage moving forward with motions or statements. However, once we've had that vote, I would like to proceed in the way that I suggested originally, which is to go round to each of the elected members and the appointed members and ask for any immediate comments from them. So at least we have a baseline of understanding from people on this committee, because you are the people who make the decision. So if we could have, I think, very simply, a show of hands at this stage, those people in favour of proceeding with the curlew issue from the go. And those against? And abstentions? Thank you. I think that makes it very clear. Now, as I said right at the beginning, I apologise for the fact that as a temporary chairman, I was unable to consult anybody beforehand. You will have noted that I have not joined in discussions online about particular policies and approaches. I felt that that was inappropriate in case that I was put into this position. I will say here that when I first joined the council, I made it very clear I didn't really want to be on planning committee, and the worst job that possibly existed was the chair of the planning committee. So thank you very much, councillors. You really put it on me. However, moving on, I'd like to first of all call upon Councillor Andre to make a statement.
Thank you, Chair, and I thought it might fall to me, partly because I thought you might start to your left, and partly that's the blessing of having a surname that actually begins with the letter A. I would like to put on record that I was not part of the committee when this planning application was first put forward. I have come into this with a completely open mind, and I have refrained from taking part in any kind of discussions outside of planning committee. I'd just like to put that on record. So no one would deny that we are currently experiencing a housing crisis and that everyone deserves a high quality home. However, I feel that our heritage and wildlife are what makes our island unique, and once significant sites are lost, so are those elements which support our quality of life. We've heard the term stewardship, and I take that responsibility extremely seriously. We've been asked to speak about the issue of the curlews. I am concerned, and I do take on board what the team leader, Sarah Wilkinson, has said. And I do appreciate the full and thorough consultations that have gone on with Natural England. But I'm still concerned that the mitigation for the curlews resulted in additional information coming forward at a later date. And it would appear to me that however carefully constructed an artificial mitigation area is, I would put it on record, I'm not an expert ornithologist, but I'm uneasy that that could be considered a suitable replacement for what we have heard is very much an endangered breed. I do appreciate the lengths that Captiva have gone to incorporate into their designs those elements that were raised by the various stakeholders, and I'm very much encouraged by the embedding of sustainable energy products such as solar panels to charge electric cars, which accords very much with our biosphere status. But at this point, because it's fallen to me to be the first one to speak, as I say, I came into this with an open mind. As I've said in planning committee before, it is all a matter of balance. So I will listen to my respected colleagues, and I think that's all I want to say at this point, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Andre. I'd like to call upon Councillor Brading to speak as he wishes.
Just for clarification, Chair, we're talking here about the curlew issue, not about the planning application in general, aren't we?
Correct.
Okay. I was part of the original decision in July 2021, and it was a very, very tough meeting, tough decision to make. The decision was made. and I stand by that as the correct and democratic decision that we made. I've kept up to date with all the correspondence and emails and changes since then, and obviously the Curlews issue, as was mentioned by officers, wasn't around at the time. Natural England then raised that with us. So I've come to this meeting this evening with an open mind again to look at the whole thing. I am surprised that the whole application is back in front of us, because like others, the Curlew issue is the one that's cropped up since. I'm not predetermined. In my humble opinion, people around this table are predetermined, but that's for them to, as we mentioned earlier, it's their judgment call whether they still take part in the meeting of the votes. But I say, I respect everyone's views, and I respect the chair and the vice chair not being here. Councillor Lilly mentioned Curlews in his speech, his passionate speech to the ward council. He mentioned Curlews several times. That's what we're here for. We are here primarily to discuss what's changed in the application of 2 years ago, which is the Curlews. I respect nature and I respect the issues that was raised. Interesting fact, 77% of the current Curlew area is now part of the SANG, and with an extra 6.24 hectares of land that's been allocated, we have considered the Curlew issue very, very strongly. I think, as was said, if I'm hearing it right, Natural England are now happy with the situation. Mitigation plan, if in fact it was needed legally anyway, has been put in place, and not only curlews, but other species of animals as well. It's important that we do that. That's what we're here for this evening. If Natural England are happy, all the agencies are happy, I think we have covered the curlew issue, in my opinion. But I'll listen to other people's comments when I make my final decision. But I appreciate all the information that's given to us this evening so far. Thank you.
Councillor Brading, thank you for putting your viewpoints very clearly forward. I will call upon Councillor Brodie, who I have no doubt at all will put his opinion upon very clearly.
You may be surprised. I'm not going to say overly much, Chair. It's, I was there on the 27th of July. I was in your position as the Vice Chair then of the committee, and the outcome of that meeting has been personally quite damaging to me and my partner. Given some of the abuse and intimidation that I've faced since then, that's made it difficult for me. I have to say that it's affected my mental health quite seriously, and I hope those people who've been party to that are ashamed of them. However, I'm a tough guy, and I'm still sat here on the planning committee, and I will continue to express my views. I'm not going to talk about the decision was made particularly on the 27th of July. That was a meeting conducted entirely in accordance with the procedures of this council. Legal officers have confirmed all of that to me and given every opportunity. They've confirmed it to external solicitors at every opportunity. Nothing wrong happened at that meeting, except in the minds of those people who didn't win the vote. I, as I often say on this committee, represent a ward in Central in Newport that has the largest housing development on the Isle of Wight in a generation. Nearly 900 homes, known as the Pan Meadows development, built on pasture and formerly farm land. And I was party to that planning application right at the beginning of my election in 2005, 18 years ago. Sarah was the planning officer. I wasn't as involved as she was, Sarah Wilkinson. But she would be able to confirm the amount of priority that was given to wildlife within that area, in particular dormice, who delayed the commencing of the Pan Meadows development for quite some serious time. But my residents didn't expect me to oppose that application because people needed homes then. We're talking about an application that came to this committee back in December 2009. People needed homes then, not as much as they need them now. They needed homes. And it led to 255 affordable homes, 200 of which were rented. Lots of relatively cheap housing, a lot of it sadly privately rented. And you know, we lost a significant part of the east side of Newport. You know, Councillor Price over there, born and bred in Newport, will remember fields at the back of his garage on Pan Lane. It's all entirely different, but we dealt with it. And I reflect often when I look at the boxes full of planning related documents relating to that application, because it was enormous. I mean, I have it, you know, even what I have in my loft. I'm sure there's far more in the planning unit. I was impressed as a new councillor, as someone who didn't know a lot about planning. I probably do know a lot more now, but impressed by the efforts that were made. And I've always considered since that time the planning officers, together with other professionals, do their absolute best to make the right recommendations to them. I don't always agree with them, and that's one thing nobody ever accused me. But on this application, in regard to the curlews issue, I think they've done what they needed to do. I understand that Natural England were not a statutory consultee. They failed to make comment on this curlews issue at the time until it was obviously pointed out to them by others, which is good that it happened. And they have worked to deal with the issue. Mitigation has been produced. Natural England have confirmed that. I'm an expert in everything, but actually an expert in nothing. My background is in economics and politics and history. That's my further education. I'm not a planning officer. I'm not an ecologist. I'm not an archaeologist. So when those people are making recommendations, I listen to them. The recommendation that I'm getting from planning officers, based on professionals, is that the mitigation in the case of the curlews is satisfactory. I've seen the site, both on a formal visit and privately on one of my many cycle rides in the area, and I will have no problem whatsoever in voting for approval of this application regarding the curlews issue. The new issue, I'm not predisposed to it or anything until I've read all of the report, done the visit, and listened to everything too. I don't see that anybody, unless they're a professional in the areas mentioned, can have any other option but to vote for accepting the mitigation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Brodie. And can I just add here to anybody outside listening and to anybody who knows what's going on, that one of the key points of our society is a democratic society where we decide based on our knowledge and expertise, and that it is absolutely abhorrent for anybody outside this chamber to consider that it is appropriate to abuse anybody because of their views. And I have to say that includes both the developers and objectors. Apologies, Claire Christensen. Sorry, I say far too much sometimes. I'd like to offer you the opportunity to say a few words.
Thank you. I'm not sure if this is appropriate right now, but I think it's questions about curlew issues. So with the mitigation, I just wanted to be clear, with that site, how long is it going to take to make it suitable? Because I couldn't quite get clear the whole sort of mitigation, how it was going to proceed. And so will any other development be delayed until the curlews are happy in the new area? Because obviously they're not using it right now. So what would be needed to make them want to be there? Thank you.
I think that's actually quite an interesting point, and I'd like to ask the planning officers to react to that, please.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Councillor Wilson. I may need to take a moment to confirm the length of time to establish the habitat. I will get back to you on that point. I think in terms of phasing of the provision of the mitigation, effectively, the existing habitat wouldn't be lost until this habitat had been provided, in essence. So we wouldn't be looking at building on any of the sites or undertaking any of the work that would disrupt that would move or build on the curlew on the existing IW46 until this was available effectively and the work had been undertaken and the mitigation was in place. Some of it's obviously long term in terms of re-establishing boundaries, growing hedgerows. That is a longer term thing that won't be immediate. We won't wait for the re-establishment of that hedgerows before we start, if approved, before the development, I should say, would start, or before we allow the development to start on the existing site. But obviously it is a phased development and there are areas of the site that you can build on without impacting on what is the current curlew habitat. I think the other thing, I'm just kind of reflecting back on the report pack and the information in terms of the usage of this site, and one of the key factors that I think is probably important to highlight, and is discussed in the report, is that in terms of the usage of this site, we're unclear how many visits were undertaken. The strategy indicates that they undertook visits for a period of a year, in essence, 2018-19, over that period. Obviously, they would only visit in the season where you'd expect the curlews to be using the land, and they are an overwintering bird. However, we have, based on the information, a number of visits where they were identified. Off the top of my head, I believe it was 5. But I can double check that, it is in the report. We don't know how many times they visited and recorded 0. They don't report negative visits. So we believe they may have visited a significant number of times, but only identified birds on a few occasions. So if I can just get the facts for you. So the stats for the Isle of Wight took place in the winter of 18-19. And the site was identified following that as a low use site, which I've confirmed before in terms of that. In the results, apologies, I can't find the section of the report. Please bear with me. Sorry, here we are. It was identified that during there, so out of, we don't know how many times they visited, but there were 4 counts, 4 positive visits is all we know. And where they were recorded, there was a presence of 6, 14, 13 and 15 respectively in that period. So there, although we say curlews are using the habitat now, and we have evidence to suggest that, there may be, and the strategy outlines that there are times in which the sites will not be used at all, because obviously previously that land was on a working farm, so there were times where there would have been cattle, it would have been used. So there may be times where the curlews aren't using it at all, and therefore we're not, in essence, displacing them for that year. It's a low use site, it's not a primary or a core site. And so it's about the usage of it as well as the nature of it and the nature of the mitigation land. But in essence, in answer to your question, apologies, I've diverted slightly, the mitigation land would be available prior to any of the existing IW46 being lost.
Thank you. I think that answer was actually longer than the original question, so it shows how much information the officers have got. I'd now like to call upon Councillor Jarman to say a few words.
Thank you, Chair.
Sorry, Councillor Jarman, I do apologise. Can I stop you very briefly? I do apologise dramatically.
Your discretion, Chair.
It is to Claire Christensen, sorry, to Councillor Christensen, to make any additional comment that she wished. I do apologise.
I would have just added, it would be nice to have a time frame on how long that mitigation site would take to become. I think just public interest would want to know that. Thank you.
Councillor Christensen, again, let me apologise. I should have come straight back to you. Councillor Jarman, please.
I think, like Councillor Critchison, there are still unknowns here. We talk very heavily about the mitigation for the curlews, but it's also noted that there were other red-listed species which were referred to, and I've not seen any mitigation which has arisen or been proposed specific to details of those, which is challenging. And whilst the number of curlews might be relatively low, I understand this represents about a quarter of the Curlew base within our regional area, which is perhaps more significant. Also, indeed, but perhaps rather shameful that their overall numbers are so low. We're dealing with a quarter of their local population. I would like to know when it was that officers first became aware of the protected elements of this site and of the Curlew issue. So whilst they find that information, I'll carry on a little bit. I've not found on the site the records posted of what was referred to as the many meetings with Natural England on our planning portal. And I would have expected, given the significance of this singular topic, to see that information rather than a simple summary of their position at the conclusion of that many meetings discussions. I am concerned about the antiquity of some of the evidence which is referred to. And 2018, as anybody even perhaps without even O-level mathematics or GCSE as it's now called, although is already 5 years old. And I'm frequently concerned about our use of old information. It would be very useful, it would have been very useful to have up-to-date information, comprehensive information as a proper habitat assessment without all the caveats that we've been expressing about the information before us today. That would certainly have assisted. I don't know whether, to Sarah Wilkinson's view, that would have made the decision go one way or the other. But in the absence of that information, we're left in something of a quandary, dealing with old information, caveated with exclusions as to what was recorded, when it was recorded, and the detail therein. That is quite challenging. But I would welcome the answer to when the officers first became aware of this issue in terms of the protected elements of the site.
Councillor Jarman, actually, it's within the various bundles of information, and unless I'm much mistaken, that's June 22, 24th of June 22.
Just to be precise, they were not aware of anything relating to the site prior to that date.
Sorry, apologies. The answer I get is no. That's when they knew. That's when the letter was sent from, I think it's Natural England, to the council. 24th of June 2000. I'll get my dates right one day. 24th of June 2022.
Yes, I'd understood that was the date of the letter. I didn't know whether there had been any discussion before then or whatever, but thank you for confirming it.
I would now like to call upon Councillor Oliver for his words.
Thank you, Chair. I will lead with a question, which is who will manage the mitigation land, the boundaries and the education boards going forward. But it's also, this is one of the first planning applications I sat on as a new member back in July 21. A very long evening, a very fraught evening, to be honest. And I did question whether I should be on planning after that meeting, I have to be honest, with the grief that we all seem to get given at that time. I abstained on the first vote, which meant it was a drawn vote, and we went then into deeper consultation because I wasn't happy about a few things with the affordable homes and the ownerships and things like that. I was given the answers I felt was required at that time as far as the affordable home sign off and everything else which was needed to be done. I've always believed if you need if you need professional advice, you speak to a professional. When we're being given advice and steerage, like we are at the moment, then you listen to that steerage. I don't have any issues at all. If someone like Natural England have now signed off the mitigation with this site, as an expert, they're an expert, they've been consulted and signed off this site and the mitigation which goes with it, I don't have any issues with that whatsoever. Because as far as I'm concerned, that is the only thing we should be discussing this evening as to whether that's correct or not correct. The decision to actually build and all of the grief which went with that back in July 21 was dealt with then. And I don't agree that we're dealing with the whole application. Again, I have to be honest, we should be dealing with this one part of the application, but we are dealing with what we're dealing with. It is a shame Natural England didn't provide that information back in July 21, because we could have all moved on with our lives quite easily, including the farmers and the builders, and we could have had a huge amount of affordable and rental homes being built and people living in them now, which we desperately need on the island. And to delay this any longer is totally wrong.
Thank you for that, and I appreciate the exposition. Very clear. I'd now like to call upon Councillor Price for his words.
Thank you, Chairman. First of all, I just want to say that I've probably been on this planning committee the longest, I think. And I want to say to the committee that if you reconsider this whole application, it's a mistake, a big mistake. You're walking into a trap. And it's something that will damage our local planning authority. Okay, so you can decide from that what you wish, but that's my advice. The outcome of the previous decision, however, would have been entirely different if I'd have been on that committee and I'd been participating, because during that debate, I came to a decision which definitely will affect if I participate in a reconsideration of this whole application. But there would be a weaker position now for refusal of the application because a lot has changed. The land is no longer being farmed. It's no longer a dairy farm. That ship, sadly, very sadly, and I say that genuinely, having a huge dairy farm in my ward, it's damaged Isle of Wight sustainability on dairy production. It has damaged it irreversibly, and that cannot be changed now. Something else that's changed is that there is a huge reduction in rental properties available, and that steers our decision making even further towards, in the absence of the new island plan, it steers us even more into being in favour of sustainable development. Going on to the curlews and all the other wildlife that's at risk on that site, and going on to what Councillor Andre said about mitigation is false. All mitigation is false. Every bit of development provides something false. It wasn't here before. It's not naturally happened. The human race has put it there. I would actually say that probably a lot of mitigation I've seen while on this committee is actually very positive. Mitigation works. It takes time to work, but it works. And actually some of what you get from mitigation protects other bits of land in perpetuity. So possibly what is going to be provided on this site could actually make the habitat better. That is not something that I have the expertise to say whether it will or not, but if you look at mitigation around the island on wetlands and other natural habitats that now have hardly any human intervention, they are now working. and they're flourishing. There are things that obviously affect wildlife, but we've got some excellent protected areas on the island, and actually this potentially provides another area of protection that humans can't get on very easily. The one thing I would say about the mitigation is that I wonder if we only make a decision on the mitigation for the curlews tonight, and that's the only decision that we make, and we don't reconsider the whole application. Can we condition that it's provided, the mitigation area is developed and provided, bearing in mind it's mostly just changes to the land structure, it's not building work or anything. Could we, and would it be appropriate to condition that the curlew mitigation and the whole of the SANG is put in place before phase B starts? Is that a potential acceptable condition? Thank you.
I think I have a planning officer on my shoulder.
Thank you, Chairman. In essence, yes and no, as you would expect me to say. Yes, it's absolutely reasonable to require, I would say not a condition, but as part of my suggestion, as part of the recommendation, is that it forms part of the legal agreement. We are looking at incorporating the need to comply with the habitat enhancement mitigation strategy as part of a term of the legal agreement, because it does require it to be retained in perpetuity and a long-term management plan. And so that is more appropriate as part of a legal requirement than a condition. So yes, what I would caution on is in relation to stating phase B, just because, as said at the beginning, the phasing plan is indicative and it may change. So at the moment, the proposal is effectively, if I read you from the habitat regulations assessment, it says, in summary, the management plan sets out details for habitat creation, ongoing management and overall objectives for habitat improvement. Habitat creation will occur prior to any work affecting IOW 46 to ensure that curlew habitat is not lost, and monitoring will inform success of the scheme. The management plan has been agreed and will be secured in perpetuity via a Section 106 agreement.
Thank you. I think that's probably answered. Can we just hold for a minute? I'd like to call for a short adjournment. I know we've been going quite some time. I suspect several people.
Absolutely get what you're saying, Sarah. Thank you. I think what I'm trying to get at is that the committee really should, if it's considering just the curlew issue in its isolation, we should be looking to provide the additional habitat as early as possible. I understand it's before what's the land reference, IOW 46. I understand before any work starts on that part of the site, but obviously all of the other species are going to be disturbed from elsewhere on the site from the beginning. So the earliest opportunity to get the mitigation land finished, and certainly the parcel that's isolated from sort of the human intervention element of it, should be put in place as soon as possible. So anything that we can build into a decision tonight to bring that in as early as possible, I'd certainly look to the officers to help with where we can put that if a recommendation is put forward. Thank you.
I think that sounds very sensible, but something to consider further. I'd now like to call for a 10-minute adjournment, at which time you may wish to go and get a cup of water or whatever. That means you will be back in 10 minutes. Please make sure that you do not discuss this with anybody else once you are outside, even if you're going to facilities. It is important that we respect the integrity of this particular committee. Thank you. Hands up, anybody not here, please. Okay, looks like we're all here and we're all ready to go, which means Councillor Price, I believe that you concluded your few words. Excellent. So I would like to ask Councillor Quirk for his few words.
As far as I can see, the only thing that's changed in this application is the issue about the curves. And I have to say, I think it's an absolute nonsense that we're looking at the whole application again, because only the curves has changed as far as I'm concerned. This application has the potential to give homes of the sort that we need on the island. A lot of the things that are approved on the island are not the right sort of home. But what this application is the right sort of home. A number of affordable houses, a company that actually does build out what they're going to do and does deliver affordable homes. So I was for it before, and I haven't seen anything other than the Curlews change being for this application. Before I came to the island 20 years ago, I was actually a fairly upbeat scientist, quite serious issues, and I ran one of the companies that's major environmental assessments for things like this. In the UK, there are 66,000 breeding pairs of curlew, and we're talking about 7 pairs of curlew. The migratory birds, so it depends when you take the numbers, they could just be passing through that field for the day. So it only actually matters if you're talking about where they are between February and June. That's when they breed. We were on the site the other day. They have a very, very clear. I didn't hear any. The loud call. I didn't hear any. I didn't see any. They've got a very obvious birds. They've got a very large curved bill. They're easy to recognise. We spent an hour on that site. I didn't see or hear a single. Got to balance that against 180 affordable homes, people of our £2,500 on our houses. I think it's an easy decision. Curlews they won't die, they won't disappear, they'll just move. You can't guarantee they're going to the place that you're making all nice for them. They might just move far down the coast. But they will still be a breeding pair of curlew. They don't need this field to be a breeding pair. And the biggest threat to curlews is actually foxes, but the increase in the number of foxes, not in loss of their habitat. And most of the curlew actually are further north. The Isle of Wight is not the natural habitat of the curlew. All I've got to say.
Thank you, Quirk. Thank you, Councillor Quirk, that input. I'd like to call upon Councillor Spink for his word, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to start, please, by asking a question, and it's really following on from Councillor Critchison's question about will the mitigation site be up and running and effective by the time that development starts or before development starts. And what I'd like to ask is this. If I've understood it correctly, development will start, but in different areas to where the proposed mitigation site will be. What happens if it's obvious that the curlew are not taking to the mitigation site? Will, for example, the development cease? Will the curlew simply be driven out? What does the management plan for the mitigation site say about that?
Would you like to
Um,
respond to that? I think you've got an answer.
I've got some answers, and I think I've got some answers from previous questions. I'm not sure if it would be helpful to give them now or later in terms of the process. In essence, mitigation is such that it is something that's accepted in kind of development terms, and it's accepted by when dealing with planning applications. It's something that is monitored, and therefore it can be adapted if necessary, if it's seen that elements can be improved or altered. But mitigation is something that's accepted, and I think I've covered in the report pack the fact that the bird wager strategy actually is accompanied with a mitigation strategy that provides ideas on how to mitigate, and that you can mitigate for it. And so that's just one thing I'd highlight. In terms of the work, I suppose it's difficult because yes, in theory, they could not use the site. But I suppose the question is at what point, if we do all best endeavours to make it suitable and we monitor it, the monitoring is proposed for a period of 10 years to ensure that the habitat is the best it can be for that species. Obviously, what the strategy goes on to say, and I think it's been covered by one of the councillors speaking, is that they are a transient species. This is a low use site where when they come back from the SPA, they utilise this site. There are other sites that they also utilise, which is why numbers vary. Sometimes there's 4, sometimes there's 15, because they don't stay there all the time. So it is a case of monitoring it over long term, in the same way that we've talked about the monitoring currently that's identified the use of the existing IW46, to establish actually whether they're using it and whether we can improve it to kind of encourage them to use it. Is it convenient now to answer some previous questions, or in terms of the monitoring and who will do it and various things like that? Would that be helpful? No, now?
I think that would be very clear that it would be helpful to have a reasonable exposition of this. Yes.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I thought it'd be useful to, we have produced a draft section 106 addendum to cover this point, and in that it incorporates the bird conservation area provision. And I thought it might just be useful for councillors, I think it will answer a lot of questions, that cover a couple of points that are raised in it. And so under the section bird conservation area provision, and this is only a draft, so it hasn't been finalised, and all parties haven't signed it yet, but just as an indicator of the direction of travel for the kind of proposal, it's not to initiate the development unless and until the bird conservation area has been laid out in accordance with the relevant details in the bird conservation area scheme. To use reasonable endeavours to agree the transfer of the bird conservation area to the Hampshire and Isle of Wight Wildlife Trust or the RSPB, or any other party as may be agreed with the council that is suitable for the management and maintenance of the bird conservation area, and thereafter complete the bird conservation area transfer as soon as reasonably practicable. That is then linked to a monitoring fee, which would be given to that party to monitor and maintain that land in perpetuity. So in essence, what we're looking at, in answer to a previous question, is who would be monitoring it and who would be doing that monitoring. The land would be transferred to the Hampshire Isle of Wight Wildlife Trust or the RSPB. So as the experts in the field, they would be able to adapt and alter in order to ensure that it was the best it can be. Having regard to the fact the existing IW26 was active farmland. It wasn't a conservation area specifically to protect that species. This will be designed to be that. It will allow various things outside of season. So it will, I don't know if members have gone through the strategy that's online, but there will be grazing of the natural grazing outside of the bird nesting season, in order that it can be naturally managed, rather than going in and kind of mowing the grass effectively. But in the season, it will be there, it will be available, and then there'll be a process effectively where every year it's reviewed and it's assessed in that way. I don't know if that helps at all in terms of that point, but thank you, Chairman.
I have another couple of questions, Sarah, please. The would it be possible to have a condition, if we were minded to accept the mitigation, a condition that no development should take place until there's an expert opinion that the mitigation land has been taken up by the curlews and all other red listed species. No. Well, until it can be seen. Here they're wild animals. That's exactly the point. One can't just repackage them and move them to the mitigated site. So would it be possible to have a condition that development is dependent upon the mitigated site being successful?
Thank you, Councillor Spink. That's a point which I think the planning officers can probably give you a very clear answer, and I guess what I know what it's going to be.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, the answer is the answer is no, but in essence, I suppose I should say I would strongly advise against it rather than say no. It would not meet the tests of a condition to put such a condition on, so it would be incredibly risky to do so, and I would strongly advise against it. It would be deemed unreasonable as a condition, in my opinion, in essence, because one, mitigation is an established process. Translocation is an established process. We do it a lot in development terms. We relocate badgers, dormice, bats, owls, all kind of protected species. You do it via a license with Natural England and they agree the mitigation, but it's an accepted process. At no point, certainly, I think Councillor Brodie earlier admitted how long I've been working in planning, but certainly in my 20-year history in this authority, I have never known a consideration to stop developments, to say yes unless in that relationship when you're dealing with a species. Because they may not use, certainly we don't know if they've used the current IW46 since 2019, so they may have moved on already. We don't know that, so we couldn't control development based on as if a bird chose to use a site or not. We can make it suitable for them and try to attract them there, but I would strongly advise against going down the route of restricting development if they didn't utilise it, especially considering we don't know. It may be that they utilise the site 1 year and then don't the next, and so it is a transient issue, so it'd be exceptionally risky to do so. I think that's the question. Thank you.
Now, we've heard also various comments like it's a shame that Natural England didn't recognise that it was a supporting habitat, I think is probably the correct way to put it. In fact, the responsibility and duty for drawing to the local planning authority that it is such a site rests with the applicant, doesn't it? It's for the applicant to identify it and draw it to the LPA's attention.
Thank you, through the Chairman. That's a difficult question to answer in essence. The difficulty being it's not a designated site. And so I suppose the challenge is certainly if you are not aware that a Solent Waders Brent Geese strategy exists, you would not know to look at the map in it, which then incorporates the site. When the map wasn't, as far as I can, I've done some research into it, and to the best of my knowledge, as far as I can tell, the map wasn't created till 2020 to actually be able to specifically identify. So it's very difficult to, in terms of the responsibility, that there is a responsibility in terms of, yes, absolutely, we'd expect designated sites to be identified within the environmental impact assessment, absolutely. This isn't a designated site, it's a supporting site for the SPA. It appears that Natural England obviously we're not aware of the designation of the, of the site. It's not a designation of the non-designated site. And so I would respectfully suggest that if the national consultee body were not aware of it, it may be unreasonable to expect a developer to be aware of it. Thanks, Sharon.
Thank you for that.
I don't have another question, but I do wish to, I'm sorry if it takes a little while, but I do wish to address the issue, please. One thing that we've heard from a large number of the, if I may say so, very eloquent speeches that were made from this area of the room, one thing that we've heard is that there's a great deal of public interest in this development. And we've heard that there were 570 letters of objections at the time of the last hearing, which is 2 years ago. I don't know if it's increased, it certainly won't have decreased. We've heard that a large number of people are concerned that there's been no further consultation period on the curlew mitigation. Now, there could have been a further consultation period. In fact, I would suggest that there should have been a further consultation period. So, for example, Ryde Town Council, who are a statutory consultee, have not been consulted. And they've told you that today. Nettleston and Seaview, I don't think have been consulted, and it's extremely close to them. The public has not been consulted. Now, the papers were served, these new documents were served in March and April of this year, just a few weeks ago. That is over 2 years since the closing of the consultation period. 2 years. We normally, as a planning authority, we simply don't always accept documents that are served outside the consultation period, let alone 2 years outside. Now, we have a discretion as a planning committee to allow documents outside the consultation period. But the guidance that I've read says that you should only do so when it's fair. And that one of the tests of its fairness is one of the tests of its fairness, if I can find it, is that you can only do it if it's not unreasonable. And it could be argued, I think, that it's unreasonable in such a controversial matter as this not to have had a consultation period on such an important issue. So is it possible, I said I wasn't having another question, but I'm going to, because I've seen a number of people looking as if they need an answer to this. Would it not have been possible, and should it not have been the case, that there was a further consultation period and a re-advertising of this matter so that the public knew that it was being reconsidered being considered for the first time in relation to the curlew? And why hasn't there been a consultation period?
Thank you, Councillor Spink. I guess that might be the case. In this particular case, perhaps I could ask one of the planning officers to take that forward.
Thank you, Chairman. I will answer it, and then Ms Bolton may wish to come in if he wants to elaborate in any way. I just want to correct an inaccuracy in what was said, in that we do accept comments received after the consultation period. I think I wrote down that we don't accept that. That's factually incorrect. We receive comments up to the day in which the decision is made. Hence why we bring an update paper to committee that outlines any letters that have been received between the publication of the report even, let alone the end of the consultation period. We received, and why we in essence accepted a letter from Natural England in June in relation to this issue at all. We will accept letters up to the position, time in which the decision is made. So that's factually incorrect. We would accept comments. Our statement of community involvement sets out that when additional information is received in relation to a planning application, it will be displayed on the council website for a period of 14 days before a decision is made. In this instance, as you state, the information was put on the council's website on the 6th of March. Therefore, it has significantly exceeded the 14 days that we stipulate. Although I appreciate that a formal reconsultation hasn't taken place, there has been significant press coverage of this matter, and therefore, we have advised every single person who wrote in relation to the original application that the item was coming back to committee this evening, and they were all obviously given the opportunity to register to speak at this meeting. And so, the public who have previously commented have been made fully aware of the additional considerations of this meeting. And I think that's probably all I need to say.
So the one thing that I'd add in terms of consulting on additional information is the expertise that we require for that information to be assessed. And when the planning authority receives information that is extremely scientific in its basis, such as the information received for Curlews, we will consult with Natural England, as they are the government's scientific experts on the issue. It would be their comments that would feed into our report, not generally members of the public who weren't experts in the ecological field, and therefore followed the guidance in the development procedure order in terms of when we should or shouldn't re-advertise an application.
Well, I don't want to take up too much time, so I'm going to make a few comments in my address about the consultation period. And I'll be corrected in due course, no doubt, if I'm wrong. But the decision whether or not this committee will take into account matters statements served 2 years after the close of the consultation is our decision. The planning officers may have a method of operating whereby everything's put on the website, whether it's 2 years after the consultation period or not. But it's our decision whether or not we will consider and attach weight to these documents when the public, is it fair that the public has not had an opportunity to comment? It's not been re-advertised. I'm surprised, I have to say, that people say that people have been contacted, because the gentleman sitting just here, I think, was on behalf of the public, and also on the gentleman sitting there who's gone now, the Parish Town Council, said that they had not been contacted. And I think Councillor Adams will probably tell you in due course, but he can speak for himself, that Nettleston wasn't contacted. So I'm surprised to hear that. And I would ask that we consider, first of all, if we think it right, that this committee should consider this matter when the public haven't had the same chance. There could have been a proper consultation period. There could have been re-advertising of it, and then it would have been a fair process. And the guidance actually says we have this right to rule it out if we think it's unfair. Now, I'd like to generally address the committee, if I may, please. I'd like to say that the ship hasn't sailed in terms of this farm. When I went round the site visit, it may be low scale, but there was still farming going on. There were cows and there were sheep and lambs. If planning permission were not to be granted, there's every prospect, one would think, that it would turn back into a farm again. The landowner's not going to sit there with it empty, or possibly he would take up a stewardship scheme whereby it's rewilded. But to say that it's no longer a farm and therefore it's done and dusted isn't right. It won't be a farm any longer if we grant permission tonight, but there it is. Now, the other thing that I would like to raise is this, is that it's been said that it's been said by many people that we should listen to the experts. And I agree that one would hope that Natural England is expert, but to be fair, Natural England have a huge work task. Now, one of the recognised experts, I understand, is the Game and Wildlife Conservation Trust. And they've made a statement, which is on the planning portal, by Jessica Brooks. She's a biodiversity advisor with a BSc and an MSc and a basis conservation management qualification. Fairly well qualified expert. She has said this in her report, and it's direct quotes. Forgive me if I'm telling you things you've read already. There is considerable risk, this is her conclusion, there is considerable risk that curlew will not use the new mitigation habitat due to the change in the nature of the wider landscape after development. Considerable risk. Now, the changes in the landscape that she draws attention to is firstly this: the landscape will look very different from the air. Instead of open farmland, it'll be an urban housing estate covering 38.16 hectares. That's my observation, not hers, but she says it will look very different from the air and it will be urban as opposed to farmland. The mitigation site is a relatively small site in that urban development. It's 6.4 hectares. The other thing she considers is this, that that no consideration in the habitat regulations assessment has been given to whether or not the proposed housing will disturb the flight paths of the curlew. That is an important consideration because, as I understand it, flight paths change according to wind direction. And they don't, unlike helicopters, they don't just come straight down. So no consideration given to the flight path. There will be some disturbance in terms of noise and housing on the edges of the site. I appreciate 150 meters away, nevertheless. And her comment on the habitats regulation assessment is that the data is not sufficiently robust to quantify the usage by the curlew. And she cites 4 visits in 2018 and 19. She says this: 15 curlew is not insignificant when you consider that current research shows that the curlew is at risk of becoming locally extinct. And they're on the UK red list of conservative concern. This site is only 480 meters from the SPA and the Ramsar site. So bearing in mind those comments, I'd ask committee to consider then the test that we have to consider when deciding whether or not the habitats regulation assessment is sufficient. And that test is this. This is from the NPPF guidance notes that I took from the website yesterday, and it's the most up-to-date guidance. The habitats regulation assessment must contain complete, precise, and definitive findings and conclusions to ensure that there is no reasonable scientific doubt as to the effect of the proposed development on the habitat. Mitigation measures must ensure that a development does not have an adverse effect on the integrity of the habitat. The first mitigation...
Councillor Spink, I hate to interrupt you in mid-flow, and it's very unfortunate, but we're going to run out of time unless we make a decision to extend time. I'm more than willing to listen to that again and for you to take it on, but I don't want you to run out of time at all, or for anybody else to. Can I call upon a proposal? Thank you. Councillor Jarman. Entirely reasonable, yes. Right, so we have a proposal.
Chairman, I propose we extend the meeting by up to 1 hour. I look for.
And it is seconded by Councillor Andre. Can I have all those in favour of extending it by up to 1 hour? That's very clear. Apologies, you will have to listen to me as well at some stage now, but I'd like to hand back to Councillor Spinken. Please accept my apologies for interrupting you.
No, no, not at all. It was necessary. I hadn't realised it was so late. And I haven't got very much more to say. So just repeating from where I was, mitigation measures must ensure that a development does not have an adverse effect on the integrity of the habitat. Now, one of the things in the mitigation that can be considered is whether or not a plan can be revised, say that the existing habitat can be preserved. Now, what we've been talking about and what the application proposes is not to consider that. Why could these plans not be changed? Say that the curlew can keep that field. Why do the curlew have to be moved to suit the plans? That hasn't been considered. That's an important consideration of mitigation, in my respectful submission. Finally, and it's repetition because Councillor Lilly has raised it, but it is right to say that the section 182 of the NPPF, the presumption in favour of sustainable development does not apply if the development is likely to have a significant effect on a habitat site. Can we actually say that it won't? And therefore, if it won't, is it likely that it will? I don't know. But we don't have to rely on the presumption not applying. It seems to me, with great respect, that we can't possibly satisfy the other two considerations of the NPPF guidance. We cannot rule out the possibility of harmful effects on the integrity of the habitat site of these endangered species. And I ask again rhetorically, why couldn't the plans have been changed to accommodate the curlew? It might mean a few less houses. It might mean a smaller SAN. I don't know, but it could have happened. Thank you.
I can shout loud, but apparently I have to have the microphone so other people can hear me, which is entirely reasonable, so I apologise. Councillor Spink, thank you very much for that. I'd like to ask the planning officer to make a brief comment on that. I think it's fairly clear where we go with that.
Thank you, Chairman. I will try and be brief. I just wanted to draw all the council's attention to the Appendix E, effectively, of your pack, which does include the comments that were received by in relation to the kind of comments that were read out. It is a summary rather than a verbatim, but they're in there and they do cover the points and the officer's conclusions in relation to those, or the officer's comments in relation to those points. Within part of that, you will have noted when you read through it that I also break down how the strategy identifies the value of calling it a low use site. So the site scored 0 in the categorisation of the survey results. And I've set out how that's done in terms of using the comparison to the national thresholds, comparison to the local values and everything else. And that point, and that responds to the issue in terms of the numbers of curlews. But it goes on to kind of provide more detail and explanation in terms of a response using strategy in relation to that comment. So Councillors, I know it's in the pack, so you would have read it, but I just wanted to highlight that that comment is provided and it is responded to if you wanted that information. I also thought it'd be useful. One comment was made in relation to the flight paths and having to travel over housing in order to get to the site. What might be useful is to share this image, which is the map from this strategy itself, which highlights the area here being the SPA and the site being here, IW46. So at the moment, one presumes, if we're saying birds don't fly straight, that the species already fly over housing and a built up area in order to get to the existing IW46. So that just shows the proximity we're talking about in terms of the SPA, and then the site here being IW46, and then the proposed mitigation site, which handily it slightly stands out because it's the ploughed area or the dry area at the point of the cursors here. This is mitigation land, this is IW46, this is the SPA where the birds are originating, as it were. I thought that might be helpful. I think Ms. Walter may wish to come in if you may.
Thank you, Chair. And just to pick up on one point, and I would agree with Councillor Spink, that if councillors wish to give greater weight to the views of the non-statutory consultees over Natural England, who are the statutory consultee, they are, of course, entitled to do so. I think, officers, we would advise councillors to think very carefully on this point, and in terms of their thought process, they may well be required to